Hi, I'm Charlene Jurgensen, and again, welcome to Quilting from the Heartland. It's really fun for me to be here today because I have a special guest, my daughter Angie. Welcome, Ange.
Thanks, Mom. It's good to be back with a whole new season and lots of fun things to share.
Angie's going to show us how to do cherry berry baskets today, and she has done the quilt from beginning to end, so I think it'd be more than right if you got to talk about it.
That sounds wonderful. Why don't we get started? The whole quilt actually developed when I saw this collection of fabric called Cherry Berries, and I was so excited about it. It had just beautiful, vibrant colors with sort of a 40s or 50s feel. And so I thought, what would be appropriate for that time period, and baskets just seemed to be the right quilt. So first I actually picked out the background fabric, the little red checks in the back, and then of course I wanted a stronger color to go around the basket, so that's where the blue came in. And if you notice, it's actually a basket in a basket. First there's the blue that makes the outer basket, and then the inside is the little red basket with a little yellow background. Then I moved on, and actually I remember the day, Mom, we were picking out the fabric, and the border that surrounds the baskets has the cherries in it, and I think that's where the name of the line came from, and it just finished it off. Do you remember that day?
Yes, I do, and I also remember that we were trying to pick, for the outside side triangles and then the background of the little baskets. We really kind of went back and forth on the amount of texture that we wanted in that, but I think we settled on the right one that day.
Yeah, we did. And then the blue, again, repeated in the little check that finishes off, I think, the block quite effectively. Then, if you remember, we were having kind of a trouble trying to figure out what to put in the middle. We couldn't decide if it should be a yellow square or what it should be, and we ended up taking the middle part of the basket out, the smallest piece, and putting four together, and it kind of created a sub-pattern in the middle of the quilt. And I remember we were so excited when we actually laid that out on the flannel board.
Many times, I'm sure viewers think that the first one we do is probably the one we end up with, but how many different ones did you actually do before we got to this one?
I think there was at least 3, Mom, before we finally settled on this. And then the yellow that surrounds the 4 blocks and the middle block just sort of set it off. It was the perfect color, and then we followed up with a frame of red and the blue. And if you notice, the binding is the check that's in the cornerstones, and we actually cut that on the bias, so it would make a nice little...
It added a different texture to the quilt for a nice ending. And also, talking about endings, Angie, all of the quilting was done on a long arm quilting machine, and she did a beautiful job, and I don't know if they can see the detail, but we will give that to them when they get the book. And Angie, I think now let's take a closer look at the striped fabric that you were talking about that you used for the sashing.
Okay, this is actually, I think the whole line of fabric was probably built around this one piece of fabric. Like I said, it has a real 40s type feel to it. And sometimes you have to look at the whole piece of fabric and try to decide exactly what you want to do with it. And I really wanted those cherries in that quilt, and I wasn't going to rest until I got them in there one way or the other. So I just took my 3.5 ruler and sort of moved it around on the fabric until I found the spot I liked. And I was happy when I discovered that this was exactly the width I needed it to be.
Wasn't there one of the quilts that we actually incorporated the rickrack and we didn't like that?
Right, you can always use the leftover parts. Don't throw it away, save it, because there's going to be another quilt just waiting that so all you would actually do is just take your rotary cutter. I could just cut a little bit of this here.
Well, you've already cut one here, so
Okay.
they don't have to.
And there it is. And when you sew your 1/4 inch seam, then this actually perfectly disappeared. It worked out really, really well. So things work out really good sometimes. So that was the border stripe.
And then they probably want to see a closer look at the rest of the fabric so they can see how they look off the bolt.
Here's the collection close up. We have the white background and the red that was just used actually around the border of the quilt. And this is in the little basket, and notice the little birds and the roses. It really has that nice feel to it, real country feel.
The one thing we try to do, and it's something we forget to tell them sometimes, is we try to use a variety of texture with different amounts of background, so
Right.
it makes the quilt more interesting when it's finished.
Right, Mom. See, we have our plaid here, and we have our small scale print, and we have our, this is the large scale print that was actually used in the cornerstones. And I had actually thought about fussy cutting this, but it really didn't matter because it was such a large scale print.
It was a perfect line for this basket quilt.
And that's another point, Mom. This all comes from the same fabric line, and sometimes that's just easier to use one whole collection of fabric than trying to pick through many. But it's fun both ways. The templates that were used in this project were the Quilter Starter Kit templates, and I used, I think, every piece from the set.
I think you did.
We had, it starts out with a large half square. And one thing I forgot to mention is this quilt is actually on point in the block. It's set on point. So that's why the half square looks like it's a quarter. And then we used the small half square for the inner parts of the basket. So that's those two pieces. And the small square was used just once, but there it is, right there. And then we have the large square that finished off the block in the basket. And then, of course, the rectangle, which is right there.
You forgot to mention, Angie, they're all from the Quilter Starter Kit, and they all include the quarter-inch seam allowance.
Yes, they do. They include the quarter-inch. And on the bottom, I have placed the grips, so when I cut, like I'm going to do now, it keeps it from slipping.
One other thing, too, and I hate to keep telling you that you forgot something, but I know you'll forgive me. In the middle of the quilt, remember, Angie, we were going to tell them that we used 4 little baskets in the center of the quilt.
Yep, four of this basket right here, just the inner part of the basket made up the center design. Not any of this around it, but just the 4 in the middle.
That was kind of the pivoting point for the rest of the baskets.
Yes, it was. So why don't we go ahead and cut? Let's see, what should I cut, Mom? I think I'll do some little half squares. Again, all your fabric should be pre-washed, especially when you're working with these bright colors. It's just good to get the sizing out and prevent any kind of bleeding issues you'd have from one color to the next. And like Mom always says, just go ahead and bifold your fabric on top of the board. And then take your ruler and place it on top, lining up the seam on the top. And just get rid of that uneven edge. And then we'll go ahead and actually just turn the board like this. And at home you might have a smaller board that's not quite so big.
The reason we do that is so that the fabric doesn't get disturbed after you've straightened it.
And then we'll just place the template on top and give it a measure and make sure that it's lined up the whole way down. It's just a nice visual check instead of trying to remember. And then just take your cutter, trim it away.
What would we do without the rotary cutter anymore?
Oh, well, that's how I learned, so I don't know what I would do. It would be different for sure. And then just place your fabric on top of your small cutting mat, which really makes it easy. And I always check on the back to make sure I get rid of this salvage. That's why I'm starting in farther. And take my cut.
You're giving it a generous salvage removal.
I'm giving it a generous salvage removal. That's okay though.
And now, again, the small mat's making it possible for Angie to turn the board so she doesn't disturb the fabric as she's cutting the half square triangles.
And then I would just go ahead and move on down the strip of fabric. So that's how the half squares were cut. The same whether you're cutting a large half square or a small half square. And basically all the rest of the cutting I think is about the same, but maybe we should talk about these
Corner triangles and half square triangles.
Right.
In the corners of the quilt, those would be called corner triangles. And you start out with a larger square, and it's cut in half diagonally. And when you do this, the bias edge would be going through here, and the straight of grain would be on the outside edges. So it's the long edge that's the bias, and the two short edges are on the straight of grain. And that keeps your quilt hanging straight when it's finished. If you put the bias out here, you'd have a lot of waves in the outside edge.
I always have Mom figure out this part for me. It's not something I enjoy to do, but and then you just cut it out of 45 so you can just follow your edge.
Yep. And then the side triangles are done a little differently than that. You start out with a much larger square, which would end up to be quarter squares when you've cut them. And I'm hoping we have a fourth one.
We don't, because I have it over in the sewing area.
Oh,
but
okay.
Just imagine that it's there.
Well, let's set one in here
Okay.
just in case, so they get the idea.
Right.
What you do is you start out with one large square, and then you cut it in half diagonally this way and this way. And this piece then, this would be the outside edge or the straight of grain, and on the quarter square triangles, it's your shortest edges that are on the bias. And again, it's the straight of grain that keeps your quilt hanging straight. Well, I think, Angie, we're ready to start sewing.
I think we've covered everything we need to over here, so let's go on over to the sewing area.
Okay.
Okay. What I'd like to do is always select the 1/4 inch on the machine, and that gives me the perfect 1/4 inch from the edge of the presser foot, from where the needle goes into the edge of the presser foot. So that's your 1/4 inch seam.
Scant quarter.
Scant 1/4 inch, that's right. As you can see on the flannel board, I've placed up one basket. And what I'm going to do is start sewing in the middle, or I'm going to piece actually the middle basket first, which looks like this. So it's actually a basket in a basket. So we'll start there. And ahead of time, I've already sewn together all of my little half square triangles. As you can see, they're the two pieces like I cut over at the sewing table are already together, and I gave them a little sewing test, which was once they were sewn together, you can take actually your little piece from the Quilter starter kit and place it on top and make sure that it's the right size, and you can trim off any that isn't. So I've already done that. Actually, you can place it like this where the grips are on the right way. So, and if you pass that test, then you can go ahead and place them back on your flannel board. Now this is one quilt, kind of like Brittany, where I like to keep it on the board so I don't forget where I am.
Well, with baskets and bear paws and some of those patterns, it's easy to get those half square triangles going in the wrong direction. And I think I accomplished that with Brittany yesterday.
Okay, so I'll just go ahead and start chain sewing, and I have an anchor cloth underneath, and the machine is actually set with a needle down position. So whenever I stop, the presser foot actually raises up just a little bit, and it allows me to readjust my piecing. And now I'll just grab 2 more pieces from the board and chain sew these together. When you're working on a whole quilt, you can actually chain sew large amounts of the same parts together, but don't get too carried away with chain sewing too many things together, because sometimes you can chain sew a lot of wrong pieces together, which isn't very much fun. And then I'll just take my anchor cloth off the back and move it to the front. And I'll come over here and iron.
You might want to do a sewing test again so you can show them how they can take a sewing test continuously.
I'll just go ahead and give this a little press. And I like to press from both sides just to make sure I didn't get any pleats or anything in the project. And another thing I'd like to point out is that when you've sewn this correctly, you would actually have a 1/4 inch space from the tip of this piece to the edge. And then when you sew across your next seam, that'll all be fine. But let's place it on here, and like Mom was talking about, the sewing test would be actually now the rectangle. So let's just see how I've done. Lay it on there, and it fits. So we should be ready to move on to the next step, which is just placing these back onto the flannel board, and you just give it a check to make sure you have them going in the right direction. And then I'll actually just place this now on top of the middle basket. Okay. And you can use pins at this point. So I'll just go ahead and place a pin right in the middle seam and just check that everything is lined up okay. When I approach this middle seam, I always like to use my stiletto to keep everything sort of tucked underneath so I don't get folded seams one way or the other. And then you can just pull that middle pin out, readjust the bottom, and sew off the piece. And as long, I'll take my little...
And Angie, why don't I press that seam open while you get the next section ready? And then...
It's good to have a mom to press. Well, it goes twice as fast that way. And now I'll just go ahead and put this piece on next. Okay. I really had fun working on this project because I love the bright colors. Okay, here's another piece, Mom.
And now this time we'll show them how to use the Heartland for pinning if they're having trouble.
Once we get that piece ironed, I'll go ahead and pin that together. It's a pretty quick quilt to piece, and it's kind of fun to have a quilt that the pieces repeat themselves. Okay, so now I've placed it back on the flannel board just to make sure that I have it in the right position. And I'll go ahead and place that on top. And sometimes it is hard to see the pinning, the exact pinning, and this has a magnifier on it, so I can actually look through the magnifier, find the exact spot to place my pin through, and check again on this piece and line it up.
Also, the light is so perfect. It's what's called a true light. And it's nice for when you're picking colors, especially in the evening.
Okay, and I'll place another pin right there. And I think the end will be just fine. So there I've checked. Oops. Got a little tail underneath. I just raise my presser foot and get that tucked underneath. And then just go ahead and aim right for the base of the pin and stop just before you get there and remove the pin. Keeping everything lined up. Okay. It's going together quite quickly, actually.
I'm going to point out something on the flannel board, Angie, that it might be interesting for them. When they look at the two, I don't know what you call this part of the basket, it's the base of the basket, they actually get pieced together as if they're a mirror image of each other. And I find when I'm making baskets, sometimes I can get that part wrong. See how this one, if you pivot it around 90 degrees, it's a mirror image of the left side. So I'll hand it to you just as if you're supposed to sew it in that direction.
Okay.
That one goes together like that.
Okay.
I've done this wrong so many times, that's why I pointed it out.
And this one, just like this, Mom? Mm-hmm. Okay.
And now, then on one of them you have to add the longer piece. Way at the, or the little tiny square, the only square that we use in the whole basket goes...
On this one?
No, it goes down on the bottom.
Right on here?
Yeah, right there. And after you get that pressed, we'll show them how it actually fits to the basket.
Why don't I give you this piece here to cut or to press?
Wouldn't it be handy if you had somebody pressing for you all the time?
Yes, it would, although this really helps to have the iron right by the sewing machine. And then I'll just go ahead and place it right on top again, just to make sure I'm in the right position, because I'm not quite sure here. Okay, that goes like that. And we have one more piece to go up on the flannel board.
And I'll see if I handed it to you right.
Let's hope. I think we got it right. So now all that remains is to place this seam on here, and we'll actually have our little middle basket.
And you know, Angie, the big basket is really put together just like the little one when they continue on. So even though we don't have time to show them all of the steps in actually constructing the outside basket, they just really follow the same process that we're putting the little one together.
That's right. Actually, I just have one seam left on this little basket, and we can just pretend like that would go up there. And then all that really remains is I would actually sew these two pieces together and then connect this seam right here. And then I would sew this seam on and that, and take one whole strip across there. And then I would piece these two together and add that onto this unit here.
Just like the little basket.
Yep, and then these go together, and then I sew this seam onto there, and we would have the completed basket. Once the completed basket is done, then you would actually place this sashing on and then this.
And now let's take them up to the larger flannel board, which we have up here. And here Angie has already attached the sashing to the main basket. And remember the cornerstones that we cut earlier? Here, this would be a cornerstone, this would be the bias edge of the cornerstone, and this is a side triangle with the bias in here and in here. And I thought it was so cool when you added that little touch of red for the inside border, and then this was reintroducing the fabric that you used in the base of this basket for a real completion. I mean, it kind of kept everything together. Many times I'll even introduce a new fabric in the border, but in this case you didn't have to. Thank you so much, Angie. It was fun having you back again.
Thanks, Mom. I really enjoyed this program.